Coming up next on the Witness the World podcast. Trust your gut.
Doctors are less likely to prescribe antibiotics now. They're realizing the challenges with it. But that is like an atomic bomb to your gut. And there has plenty of research out there that shows that when you take an antibiotic for one course, it could take anywhere up to 2 years for your gut to recover from that issue.
The content here is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Any content here should not be construed as financial, medical, or any other type of professional advice. Good day, everyone. Welcome to episode 29 of the Witness the World podcast. My name is Ben Choi, and today we'll be heading to the United States to continue on with our personal growth journey. On today's podcast, we'll be chatting with a pharmacist who shifted her career to holistic health. She's now on a mission to help guide us on a path to better health by focusing on nutrition and listening to our gut. We're pleased to have with us Dr. Loredana Shapson. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me here. I'm a big gut health nerd, and I'm really excited to share all this information with everybody.
That's awesome to hear. So, Dr. Loredana, you have been on quite an interesting journey, and you have an interesting background. You started out in what some would call Western medicine, and now you find yourself in alternative health. So if there's someone out there that could really understand the pros and cons of both sides, I'd imagine it would be you. From what I gather, it was a series of health challenges that started on this healing path, and it seems like you've never looked back. So to start us off, could you please share a bit about your origin stories from your early health battles, how you got into pharmacy, and how you became the gut health expert that you are today?
So, very interesting story. So, when I was about 17 or 18, I got diagnosed with high blood pressure. And at that time, I thought, wow, I'm so young. Why me? Why does this happen to me? So, I then pursued a career in pharmacy thinking I'm going to get into Western medicine. I'm going to figure this out for myself and understand heart health. And so, I got into pharmacy school. During that time, I had some other issues that were related to my gut. I suffered from constipation most of my life. And then in college, my doctor had put me on an antibiotic for acne. And that was a big thing that happened back then. I was on it for about 3 months. And then I developed severe abdominal cramping. I had very loose stools and like sense of urgency and pain while I was in pharmacy school. And at the same time, I was like, wow, what is going on? So it was really my health challenges that brought me into it. And then as I progressed through my career as a pharmacist, I really just noticed some patterns working in the field. I worked in a retail setting and I would see patients all the time. I mean, they became like your family and friends. And what I noticed is once they started on one medicine, then all of a sudden they got on another. And then there was a side effect and they got on another medicine. And it was just this really unhealthy pattern of just more and more medication. But then patients would come back and say, well, doctor doesn't know what's going on. So now we're trying this. Now we're trying that. And then I also started to notice a pattern where I saw children were younger and younger and younger and starting on different medications, like 20-year-olds on insulin and starting on blood pressure medicine, lots of children on a lot of like emotional, mental health medications, ADHD stuff, just really getting to be a lot. So I started to really question, like, wait a minute, since pharmacy school and then seeing the patterns in the field, like we're not really addressing the root cause of what's going on. All these medications are really doing are masking the problem. They have a place, don't get me wrong. There's definitely life-saving stuff that's necessary. But when it comes to these chronic conditions, let's give you something like a medication now to help you manage it maybe right now. But eventually the goal should be to figure out why this is happening to you and get you off of the medicine. But medicine's not really practicing that way. They're just really reactive. When something is wrong, they come in and try and fix it with a medicine or they cut it out with surgery, and that's it. They're not really understanding the body. So that was a big driver for me to put me into my holistic health space and understand nutrition and how food and supplements and what we're doing affects our health negatively. during this time too, my gut health still was an issue. I had those loose stools. I started to actually go back to constipation eventually. And then I started to bloat where I would just be unpredictable. No matter what I ate, my belly would distend and I couldn't find out what was going on. Went back to a doctor at that time. He put me on an antibiotic. And I also was doing my own research and put myself on a bunch of herbals and things like that. I didn't know what I was doing back then. And after I did the antibiotic and the round of herbals, my gut health got so much worse. I mean, I would wake up in the morning and I would take a sip of water and my belly would bloat till I looked like I was pregnant. It was really drastic. And then accompanied with that, I'd have like irritability and mood issues, and I'd be upset and I couldn't focus and brain fog. And it was just paired, this whole gut brain connection started to become really prevalent for me. So I never went back to that doctor, clearly. And so then with my research as a pharmacist and my background, I started reading clinical papers. I started reading all the research. I started studying and I started to understand gut health, and I fixed myself. And then I eventually got the courage to open up my own practice. And now I'm practicing in Pennsylvania. And I help people get off of medicine now. And I help people with bloating, IBS, constipation, diarrhea, all the gut health stuff that you can think of now. So helping them find their answers too.
Wow, what a background story there, Loredana. It sounds like you experienced anything and everything to do with gut health there. Oh,
Yeah.
it's interesting you're talking about root cause, so I guess that's kind of what we're going to go with first. There's a popular saying, we are what we eat. And I think this holds true for a lot of things here for the topic today. So,
Yeah.
if we tend to eat, really poorly, and over time we keep doing this and ignore, the warning signs, odds are we will develop, poor health outcomes that can, lead to all sorts of things. And, the warning signs, I've noticed like people having, stomach pains, nausea, vomiting. You mentioned a lot of different things there. Some people, fluff it off and don't worry about it. They don't change their eating patterns and they don't dig into it, which is, troublesome. And on the flip
Mhm.
side, other people would just go to their pharmacist. And, you probably have seen these people that take the over-the-counter medication, take it and mask the symptoms, but don't get to the root of it. And when I take a deeper dive into this, I think maybe part of the root issue is that our healthcare system, we have our doctors. This is no fault on them, but they're not trained on nutrition, and they're focused, on around here, well, Western medicine. And if they were, or if there was some kind of supplemental nutritionist kind of person that you would see over our course of our lifetime, we'd probably, save a lot of money, on different things on our healthcare, and our healthcare system. We would save a lot of money, make it more efficient. I guess from your vantage point, I'm just curious, how do you see this? Like we, spent the time, a little bit of money, then just focus on the nutrition side of things. That would have probably a lot of positive outcomes, would you think?
Oh, 100%. I mean, go back to the doctors. It's not their fault that they don't have the right information on nutrition. They clearly weren't trained on it. When you go see a doctor, you have to expect two things. You're either going to get a medication or you're going to get surgery. That's all they're trained on. They're not trained to think outside the box and really help you find the root cause. Now, what I do in my practice is I've actually successfully gotten people off of their medication just by using food. I just had a patient come in today and tell me she was having a really unique bladder issue where she would have bladder spasms that caused a lot of pain, a lot of discomfort. She had to go to the bathroom like every 1 or 2 hours because she couldn't hold enough in her bladder. It's just so uncomfortable for her. And once I started caring for her and we changed her diet, we gave her some supplements, and we really found out that her gut health was the issue because she had an overgrowth of yeast and candida. And once we started handling that, her pain went away. She fired her doctor today because we got to the root problem. And the most interesting thing about this is the doctor, when she told the doctor what she was doing, that she changed her diet and that she was using supplements and that she was feeling better and she no longer needed her pain stimulator, the doctor said, this must be all in your head. This is a placebo effect. It was really surprising how the doctor wasn't open to saying, wow, what are you doing? You used to come in here every week and now you don't need me at all for a whole year. It's just interesting. So there's a couple things there. They're trained in specific things. There's some kind of, I don't want to say arrogance, but just, hey, you don't know what you're talking about situation is how these doctors sometimes make these patients feel. Patients feel unheard. And if we could just practice the way that I'm practicing, I have gotten people off of medication. Food is medicine. I mean, Hippocrates has always said that. I read this statement once that if you fuel yourself with artificial things, you're going to need artificial things to keep you alive. And that makes so much sense. Like if you just eat whole foods, you're going to be eating living things. When you bite into an apple, the juice that comes out of it, when you smell your food and there's an odor to it, where you get these dry packaged foods with a lot of chemicals and they're franken foods, that's not what your body's meant to sustain on. That's not how nature intended it. Food's supposed to be good for a couple weeks and then it's supposed to go bad. If it lasts for more than a couple weeks, you probably shouldn't be eating it. There's definitely something wrong, going on there that's not as healthy for you.
That's a kind of a good rule of thumb. If something lasts that long, it's well, it's going to create lasting effects in you, perhaps. So,
Yeah.
getting into food a little bit, another general rule is like anything packaged, processed, that's probably bad news more often than not. And like, yeah, processed meat, refined sugars, like I'm thinking those are at the top of the list. So just wondering, do you have like a top three list of, things just to stay away from that are going to cause all sorts of issues for your gut and your overall health?
Yeah, I would take a look at if you're going to eat anything out of packages, which I understand this is conveniences of a concern, and it's going to happen. We're not all perfect. Look at your package, look at the ingredients, and if it has more than 5 or 6 things in there, that's where you need to start questioning what is going on with this product. Anything more than 5 or 6, I would avoid. And if it's stuff that when you read the ingredient labels, you don't know what it says or you don't know what those things are, you probably should put it down. So that's a good rule of thumb. Refined sugar is also a big problem, causes a lot of inflammation. We have a lot of obesity and weight issues. It can cause a lot of brain fog. To connect this with gut health, sugar will feed the wrong types of microbes in our GI tract. The more that you eat sugar or things that turn into sugar very quickly, which that would be things made from flour. So whether it's wheat or oats or rice flour, corn flour, even cassava flour, like those things turn into sugar very quickly in the blood, and it's going to feed the wrong microbes, particularly bacteria. And you're also going to have an issue with candida and yeast. And so the more of that you eat, the more you're going to grow those guys. So refined sugar, of course, is a big issue. And then I would say that the next group of food ingredients that we need to avoid are industrial refined seed oils. And these are things like your canola oil, your soybean, your grapeseed, your sunflower, vegetable oil, corn oil. These, if it wasn't for modern machinery or chemicals, we would never get oils out of these food products. And it's interesting because when they process these oils, they have to process it through chemicals. One of them is hexane. That's actually a chemical that's used in the petroleum gasoline industry. Once the oil comes out, the oil's gray in color and it has an odor. So now they have to put a deodorizer through it. And then they put coloring in there to make it look like an oil. And so there's a lot of heavy processing and chemical use in order to get these oils that by the time it gets to the end user, it is completely damaged, heated, and covered in chemicals that our body was never designed to consume. So this is a big, big, big culprit for inflammation in the body is these industrial seed oils. So those would be my 3 processed foods because of the chemicals and the additives and the colorings. And then we have refined sugar and the industrial seed oils.
So, yeah, we mentioned about like foods. I mentioned about, how to cook the foods in, better the oils to avoid. But what about, the way our foods are, transported and delivered? So, one thing is bottled water. And, like I've done some research, looking into, how like microplastics are in these things and over long use of consumption of these things that gets in your body, cause all sorts of issues. And I mean, I know for me, like I cut out, the plastic bottles. I use like, the stainless steel bottles. But then also like, plastic containers, like for salads, I haven't cut that off completely. It's just, I'm a creature of convenience. I know a lot of people are. What's your sense of like, yeah, the whole plastic thing, microplastics? I wonder what have you seen in your research?
Yeah, plastics is a huge problem in the industry, especially with health, because plastics act like hormones in our body. They're called xenoestrogens and things like that. So they behave like hormones, but they don't actually activate our body in the same way that our natural hormones do. So it causes communication issues. And we have a huge hormone problem in the United States between thyroid disease and different adrenal disorders. And I mean, everything that has to do with appetite that could all be affected by these plastics. And so it is true that plastics are a problem. I don't think there's any way for us to get away from it at this point. It's just a part of life. But like you said, you're taking measures to reduce your exposure. So things that you could do to help yourself would be to not heat the plastic at all. And also don't expose it to any acidic things, which would be tomato juice, lemon juice, any vinegars and that sort, because that'll start to break down the plastics as well. So generally speaking, if you can try to avoid some of the heat issues and the acidity issues, you hopefully can reduce some exposure to the plastic. And then making better decisions like not using plastic containers at home and microwaving them. If your package is coming in a microwavable dish, take it out, or a microwavable bag. Take it out of that product and put it into a glass dish. But yes, it is a huge, huge concern, but I just don't think there's any way to truly avoid it at this point in time. Do your best with what's in your control, and then hopefully you can amplify your own internal detoxification processes to eliminate those toxins yourself.
Those are great tips, Dr. Loredana. So just try to mitigate as much as you can, and yeah, just do your best, and then supplement that with maybe getting some advice from your local nutritionist, perhaps. We'll get into some more of those tips later. So I wanted to kind of touch on, some of the most common, gut health issues. Now we covered the food issues, the intake, just kind of high level, how to kind of, which foods to avoid. And, some of the conditions, I've learned about, for gut health, like IBS or irritable bowel syndrome. This is like a really common one from what I understand. It's not just triggered by food, but also like stress too. So there's like an interconnectivity between, like our different body functions with food, and this is kind of one of them. So I just wondered, on the high level, like you can just tell us a little bit about this, and if we just mitigate those two, eat better, reduce stress, would we be less prone to have IBS, or is there more than meets the eye to IBS?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think there's a little bit more that meets the eye. Stress is a huge factor, and we'll start there, and then I'll talk about maybe some other things that contribute to IBS. So when it comes to stress, and I tell this to all my patients, when your stress is on, your digestive system is turned off. We have two different nervous systems. One is the sympathetic. That's your fight or flight. That's what's activated when you're stressed out. Your body is worried about sending energy to your lungs, to your heart, to your eyesight, to keep you focused, to keep you alive and in survival mode. Our other nervous system is our parasympathetic nervous system, and that one is called our rest and digest nervous system. It only functions when we're calm, we're quiet, we're comfortable. And so I find that a lot of people, we could do things differently on a day-to-day basis to support our gut health with how we eat. And when we eat is very important. And so a lot of people I find they eat rushed. They eat on the go. They'll eat standing. They're in their car. They're walking. They don't actually appreciate the time that it takes for your body to register that food's going to come down the hatch and go into your stomach. So lifestyle changes that we can do to help calm our stress levels down so that we can break down our food better is to sit down to eat. Chew each bite 20 times. By the time your food signals come from your mouth and hit your brain, your body's going to say, oh, wow, there's food coming down the hatch. It's going to send a signal to the stomach and say, stomach, juices, you need to start releasing. Talk to the digestive system to prepare that process. So it should generally take you about 20 minutes or more to eat your meal. And I bet you on average, everyone's scarfing down their food in about 5 minutes, maybe 10 if we're lucky. So that's one thing we can really start doing is when you sit to eat, please sit, calm down, take a couple deep breaths and relax into like, okay, I'm getting ready to eat now. Chew your food and take your time. And that can help calm your stress levels down in that moment. Breath is powerful, so don't underestimate that. And I want to give you an example of that. Imagine you're driving a vehicle. You almost get into a car accident. I mean, instantly your hands lock up, your eyes get really big, your heart starts to pound. You're in sympathetic fight or flight nervous system. It happens in a split second. In the same way that we can go into sympathetic and that fight or flight, we can bring ourselves back down into rest and digest. And it's as simple as taking a couple deep breaths. So I always tell people maybe 3 seconds in, you can pause at the top. Your exhale should always be longer. So that would be either 4 to 6 seconds, but your exhale needs to be longer because that's the exhale that tells the body, I'm relaxing now. Okay. So do that before you sit down and eat. So that's the whole stress connection. Absolutely huge part. Those are some measures people can apply today. Now, when we talk about some other things that's kind of out of our hands, right? IBS is right now, the statistic is about 1 in 5 people. They even say it could be even more than that now, 1 in 4. Where IBS, to describe for people who are curious, are conditions where you might have bloating, acid reflux, nausea, vomiting, abdominal cramping, constipation, diarrhea. These are your typical kind of gut symptoms, but there's also some other symptoms that aren't related to the gut. We can go into that later. But just so people could identify IBS, what is causing it in our day to day? What are we doing in our lifestyle? I think the first problem that we have is antibiotics is the biggest issue. And this is antibiotics that we get from our doctors when we get sick every season. It's been better. Doctors are less likely to prescribe antibiotics now. They're realizing the challenges with it. But that is like an atomic bomb to your gut. And there has plenty of research out there that shows that when you take an antibiotic for one course, it could take anywhere up to 2 years for your gut to recover from that issue, because antibiotics are killing the bad guys, but then they're also killing your good guys. And the guys that are left are the strong and ugly and mean ones. And they're the ones that can cause a lot of those issues. So on top of that, too, when you take an antibiotic, you're killing the bacteria. And what that does is it creates an imbalance now in our gut. And now our fungus and our yeast overgrows. And this happens to a lot of women. When they take an antibiotic, they get a vaginal yeast infection and they have to take another pill to bring down the yeast. And that's because this imbalance has created. It's like almost like your police force kind of went away and now the fungus comes out to play a little bit more, right? So no one's watching them. So this is where the gut imbalances start to occur. So antibiotics that we get from our doctor, but then we also don't realize that we're getting antibiotics in our meat supply. About 70% of the United States' delivery of antibiotics goes to raising animals because they're not raised in healthier environments. They're confined too close together that they need to give them these medications. So my recommendation there is to find a local farm, get grass-fed, pastured, and organic meat, because if it's organic, it is illegal to use antibiotics in that food product. So that's a measure that everybody can take now, is to find a local farm. And so there's a bunch of places that you can look up around you. So that's antibiotic story.
So it sounds like you take one course of antibiotics, maybe you have to do a second one, then your gut is on major catch-up mode to get back to that equilibrium state, which, man, it may never happen if you're constantly taking all sorts of drugs. And I guess that kind of leads into my next item here. Is, so as we get kind of older in life, a lot of people that I'm sure you've seen, they take pain medications, all sorts of things as you get older. They got different conditions, and just can only imagine, in your 60s, 70s, 80s, if you taking a lot of drugs, what your gut system might be like at that point. Conditions like, there's this one I've been looking at, diverticulitis, and this one, apparently 2/3 of the population over 80. I did some reading on this, like on some, medical, websites from the government, it kind of listed that it's such a huge percentage and gets worse over time, but maybe all that stuff happening in your gut, it makes it really bad down there. That's why it gets worse over time. Am I kind of connecting the dots there, or is there more to it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's talk about like the importance of why we need our gut bacteria and the microbes that balance. Like, what do they do for us? And so we have to understand that the gut bacteria that live there, they do a few things. One is digest our food. So they actually release enzymes that maybe sometimes we can't. And so they're helping us break down our food. They make vitamins and minerals for us. They've actually been shown to make the same chemicals that we use in our brain. So serotonin's our happy hormone. That's predominantly made in the GI tract, about 95% of it. And so they also secrete different things like antibiotics, or what may appear to be like antibiotics. So the bacteria that we have in our gut actually help us maintain healthy balance so the bad guys don't overgrow. So they help our immune system a lot. So they have a really big function. And then probably to help you connect this with the diverticulitis that you mentioned, was these gut bacteria, one of their responsibilities is to maintain the lining of our GI tract. And this lining is only tissue paper thin. And what its job is to be like a gatekeeper. And it says, I'm going to keep all the trash and the toxins out and excrete it as stool, or I'm going to absorb you through the cell and we're going to take you into the bloodstream, whether it should be nutrients. But what's happening is if we don't have the right balance of bacteria, this gatekeeper wall becomes compromised, and we call it leaky gut syndrome. And so now they have this issue where the lining of the gut is starting to deteriorate. It's becoming inflamed. This mucus layer is starting to wear away. And that mucus layer is what keeps stool away from the membrane. But now, once this layer deteriorates, now the stool's touching the membrane and it becomes very irritated and inflamed. And this is kind of where the diverticulitis story comes in, because diverticulitis is where you have inflammation in your GI tract, but it also creates these different pockets. And what ends up happening is your body's trying to catch things and things get stuck in the pockets. And that's what ends up causing like bleeding and inflammation. And so this is where the gut bacteria come into play, because we need these guys to maintain the lining of our gut, the strength, its integrity, and really reduce that leaky gut syndrome. And so when we provide ourselves with the right foods that feed the right bacteria, we take probiotic from supplements and we get probiotics from our foods, we can start to bring in these good guys into our day-to-day life, and they'll start to repair what's going wrong.
Well, that's a good kind of summary there, Loredana. So, kind of leads me to the next question I wanted to ask you about, like probiotics. Like they are kind of like, would you say maybe like the auxiliary infantry for the soldiers in our gut there? They kind of help support the gut, and I'm just kind of wondering like what types of probiotics are good. I mean, I take one, like daily, but is it good that I take one that says, oh, it's 30 billion active cells? And like, is that a good amount, or are there better types? I'm wondering, yeah, if you can just give us kind of like an overview on probiotics, what are good and how often should be taking them?
Yeah, great question. So probiotics, we'll talk about supplements first, because you can also get probiotics from foods. So we could funnel our probiotics into 3 families. That's just the best way to do it. And so the ones that you brought up that are 30 billion, these are the most common ones that you'll find at your regular pharmacies and stores. But if you flip over to the side of that bottle and you look at the ingredients label, there's going to be maybe 2 or 3 different species listed, and they're called lactobacillus and bifidobacterium. These are the guys that are the most sensitive to antibiotics. So these are very important to take. If you are on an antibiotic, please go to the store and take these. So this is the most commonly studied one, and the one that we lose first. And so when you're picking a product in the store shelves, you want to pick one that has a lot of variety. The more, the better. So the more strains that are listed. So on average, you'll find anywhere from 8 to 14 maybe in the product. And those would be the ones that I would go for. If you're picking up a product and there's only 1 or 2, I would get more bang for your buck and put it back and go for the ones that have more. Now, when it comes to dosing, you brought up the 30 billion. So great question. There are a wide range of doses that are available on your store shelves, ranging from 10 billion all the way up to 100 billion. And the reason why they do that is because they match what's studied in clinical research. They're trying to pair what's happening in the clinical world. And so when we look at different conditions that probiotics can help, we're finding that the average dose that's needed is about 25 billion. In my practice, I use about 50 because the people that I'm working with, I want to kind of boost things up a little bit quicker. But I find that when you go higher than 50 billion, they end up having negative reactions. They don't feel well. Maybe it's like flu-like symptoms. And it's not a bad thing. It's just that it's too much too quickly, and there's too much trash being released all at once. And that's why you end up feeling unwell. So if that happens to you when you take a probiotic, don't shy away from it and stop taking it. What that means is you need a lower dose. So you can either find a pill that has a lower dose in it, or what you could do is take it maybe every other day or every 3 days and just slowly drop it in and let your gut adjust over time. And then week to week, you start increasing how much you're taking. But at most, you would just take this once a day. And so you could take it with or without food. So that's the first family of probiotics that you could certainly take. The other group of probiotics that you could take is called spore-based probiotics. These are harder to find in your store shelves and your pharmacy. And generally, you have to go through a medical practitioner or holistic health practitioner in order to get access to something like this. But these are probably the biggest missing piece. And the interesting about spore probiotics is that if we just spent more time outside playing in the dirt, we would get exposed to those types of microbes. But we're so indoors now in our modern convenient life. We hardly get outside and we're not playing in the dirt. We're not gardening anymore. We don't grow our own food. And so we're just not being exposed to nature as much. But this family of probiotics doesn't need to be as high of a dose. These are going to be certainly smaller, and there's only going to be a couple strains, maybe up to 5 that you may see in a particular product. And that dose, based on clinical research, on average is about 2 to 4 billion a day. And you would just take it once a day. So it's not like rocket science. Pick a probiotic, take it once, and you're good. And then the final one I'll just mention briefly is called Saccharomyces boulardii. That's actually a probiotic yeast. That one you can find also in your regular store, in your pharmacies and things like that. It's not my first go-to, but this one's great and has a lot of data in patients who have SIBO and have a lot of diarrhea and a lot of abdominal cramping. And especially after antibiotic use, that's a really great one to add in to prevent issues that way. And so that dose is a little lower too. So that's about, that one's measured in milligrams. So you can be around 500 milligrams, 750 milligrams for that. Once a day is usually good enough. And then when you talk about how long should you be on these probiotics? So we talked about the 3 types. My favorite are the first 2 that I discussed, and you take them once a day. Clinical research is showing that the peak benefit is at about 2 to 3 months of taking the probiotic. You start to gain benefit. And why this is important is because a lot of patients will come to me and they'll say, oh yeah, I took a probiotic for a couple weeks. I didn't really notice a difference, so I stopped it. And it's like, well, you prematurely stopped it. You didn't even give it enough time to work. So my rule of thumb with my patients is 3 months minimum. They're on it every single day. And we even have some clinical data, especially even in like skin conditions in children and different immune infections for vaginal infections in women. We see that the longer you're on a probiotic, like 6 months or up to a year, the more benefit that you can see. So right now I'll start my patients on every day for 3 months, and then we'll go to every other day thereafter, just to kind of maintain the supply.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a fantastic overview, Loredana. So, we're talking about, people popping pills and then we're popping probiotics. But what about like vitamins? Because I take some, I know a lot of people take some because some of the foods that we have, maybe they don't have a good mixture of the, nutritional content that we need. Is there any kind of like negative side of vitamins that we should be aware of, or generally most of them are pretty good? Maybe certain brands are better than others. Like, how does that all mix into our gut health? And it's just a big mix of stuff down there, and I wonder if it helps or hinders our gut health.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I would say that if you fix your gut health, you probably need less vitamins because you're digesting your food properly and you're also having the bacteria there to make your own vitamins for you. But when it comes to taking vitamins over the counter, there are some concerns. First is the quality. So you have to make sure that what you're taking is actually in the bottle. There's a lot of fraud that's happening in the supplement industry with quality. So you have to make sure that they're third party tested, and there's some certifications on there that say that they're making sure that what's in the product is actually in there. The next is that sometimes these products, because of the quality is lower, you're going to get things like soybean oil, you're going to get gluten, you're going to get dairy, you're going to get things and chemicals in there that you probably don't want to be consuming. So that would be the next thing. It's something to look at. And then my next also concern with some supplements is the gummies. Okay, so the gummies tend to have some sugar in them. They're made with some different starches. And so you have to worry about sugar as well. And food coloring as well comes into play there. So there's more chemicals there. So that's one thing that I want everyone to be aware of. And then I would say the other issue is that, a lot of these vitamins are created in a lab. For example, vitamin C is made up of ascorbic acid. That is what the FDA labels as vitamin C vitamin. But when you find vitamin C in nature, there's actually 13 different versions of vitamin C, but they're only picking out one version and putting it in your product. And when you think about it, that's not how nature intended us to use that vitamin. It wants all 13 of them. It's there in nature for a reason. And so we need to understand that laboratory created vitamins like that can sometimes be more difficult to digest, and they may not be used properly in the body. So I prefer to use vitamins that are made from whole foods. And this is foods that are dehydrated and put into powder form and then put into your pill, because now you're getting it the way that nature intended it. So as a solution to the vitamin C issue that I just brought up, there is a product called Camu powder. It is probably the best source of, it's a berry that they dehydrate down, they take the water out, and it's a whole food version of vitamin C, and it's the best source available. So that would be where I would get my vitamin C instead. Finding finding whole food sources is the best way to get your vitamins.
Got it. Yeah, those good tips, Loredana. I think there's a few things in my cupboard I'm going to have to more closely inspect in the vitamin C category now. So,
Yeah.
yeah, no, that's good. Part of, when someone's deciding to go on this journey to, discover what issues they have with their body, some people have used these things called like food sensitivity tests. Happened to be one of them. I did the test like twice actually, and it helped identify some things and kind of, I guess, give me some data points on what kind of things that I kind of thought had issues with. Dairy was one thing I had issues with, and and lo and behold, I did the test. There's a lot of indicators that said dairy type items. Yeah, it was kind of like not good for me. And
Mhm.
then, from there, I went and did an elimination diet. And then, I found that, oh, okay, well, it's actually, improving here. Because, yeah, having gas issues, uncomfortable for most people, but also equally uncomfortable for the people around you when that
Yeah,
happens. So,
absolutely.
so yeah, I mean, what's your sense of like food sensitivity tests? Are they good, or should we start with a food diary first and then do the elimination diet? Well, where do you land on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I like the food diary first. I mean, you can pretty much intuitively tell when foods are bothering you. That's the most cost-effective option. I generally don't order food sensitivity tests in my office because when I first start patients out with me, we pretty much do an elimination diet when we first start working together. It's not super a lot of stuff, but there's a couple things we remove, which are the most common issues, common foods that cause the most common issues, like gluten and dairy and soy and corn and some other grains. And then you have the artificial sweeteners and all that stuff. But what I have found in my work is when people have food issues, this actually needs to connect back to your gut health because once I fix the gut health, the food issues start to go away. So people who say they can't even touch eggplant or they can't eat eggs or they can't have dairy, now all of a sudden when we fix their gut, they're able to open up their food diversity and eat a lot more foods. And that makes a lot of sense. If your digestive system is compromised, you're not breaking down your food products, your foods into more digestible forms. And so it's getting absorbed in bigger chunks or not well broken down, and that causes irritation to the immune system. So once we fix that digestive issue, now you're breaking down your food properly. Now, to connect you with your dairy thing, there's actually research out there that shows that people who are not able to tolerate dairy, once they fix their gut health, they can hopefully and possibly may digest dairy again after that. And we found out that the bacteria in our GI tract will actually make an enzyme that will break down dairy for us. And so I have had patients when they started working with me would be crippled eating cheese or dairy, cramping, pain, diarrhea, gas, like you mentioned. And then, it would be a couple weeks later, maybe 6 to 8 weeks later, we're starting to do our work and they'll say, okay, so I had a birthday party and I went out and I had ice cream and guess what? I didn't have any stomach pain. Like it was amazing. And they're so excited because they can bring food back. And I say, oh, that's amazing. Now don't go eat it every day, but this is a good sign that like, hey, you can enjoy some treats here and there. Let's keep doing our work and then we'll see how much more your body can tolerate with that. So it's really exciting that when patients start with me, they do have a lot of food restriction, whether they took a test to tell them about their issues or they did a food diary and they just pay attention to how ill they feel after eating certain foods. And then as we work together, all of a sudden they can now eat everything again. So take a look at your gut would be my first thing. And then you can maybe spend the money on your food sensitivity test. But I prefer to look at you as a person and look at your symptoms first before I order any kind of lab test.
Yeah, thanks for that, Loredana. So it's good that there is hope out there that we can maybe, yeah. So for dairy, sufferers, I mean, there maybe is a way back, and maybe we can have a little bit more if we patch ourselves up first. And so, yeah, no, that's really great to hear. I want to kind of pivot over now to, this new weight loss craze that the world has been talking about, weight loss drugs, Ozempic, and there's a lot of other ones out there too. And now that I've learned, a few more things about you about gut health, drugs, and different things there, just wondering, I wanted to get your kind of perspective on these latest treatments out there can market it as almost like a miracle cure in a sense. And from what I can tell, like there's people there that have got off these drugs and then they've gained their weight back like quite quickly and then some. And some
Mm-hmm.
people have had all sorts of other, stomach related conditions and that sort of thing here. So it sounds to me that a lot of like the benefits are being marketed way more than and then the risks are just not really being talked about as much, and that's kind of a real problem. And this is a very new drug, so we don't really have a lot of long-term data points on how well people will kind of do over time. So I guess from your perspective, is this type of drug worth the risk?
Yeah, great question. Everyone's always looking for the next best weight loss pill. And unfortunately, here's another one that is just showing that it's not the fix for the long-term issue, right? So when it comes to these things like Ozempic and all those shots and Manjaro and Wegovy, all those things that they're marketing now, what they're doing is they're giving us a peptide hormone that we make within our own body. But the difference is when we eat foods and we get the signal that we're full or we had enough, our body releases this to tell us, hey, don't eat anymore, we're done. And then that hormone disappears. It's a very wave-like thing all throughout the day, in and out, up and down. When you take these injections, what it's doing now is keeping it at a high sustained level all throughout the day. And so people end up not being hungry, or what I'm hearing more is people are nauseous and they just physically can't eat. So what ends up happening is this tends to be more of a starvation type of approach where you're not eating as much. You physically can't eat because you don't feel well, and your body's not getting those cues. It's just constantly saying it's not hungry. So it's not a healthy way to lose weight because it's not training you as a person about how to eat properly to lose weight. You're not learning anything from the experience. Another negative thing that we're seeing is it can cause pancreatitis, which is an inflammation of your pancreas. The pancreas sits on the left side of your body below your rib cage. So if anyone has any pain there, if they're using this, please be, concerned about that and go see your doctor. But that is because of the way that it's interrupting with the communication of the hormone because you're giving it outside the body. And then another thing we're seeing too is patients, because their bodies are sugar burners. People who are overweight, there's two different types of metabolism, a sugar burning metabolism and a fat burning metabolism. When you are obese and overweight, you tend to be more of a sugar burner. It means you need to fuel yourself every 2 to 3 hours with outside food because your body doesn't know how to look within in order to make its own energy. And so we tend to grab the quick things like floured products and refined sugars to fuel that. And so when you start this product, you haven't switched your metabolism. You're still a sugar burner. And so what your body does to make up for that sugar loss and like not having enough fuel is it starts to go after your protein in order to make up for that loss. And so people start to lose protein and muscular mass. I mean, you can join any Facebook group about these Wegovy groups, but you'll see people's faces will start to droop because they just lose their muscles. So if you're on this product, definitely need to weight lift, which you need to stimulate that muscle growth. And you have to eat protein at every single meal at a minimum of about 30 grams of protein per meal, which if you look at the size of the palm of your hand, you want it to be as big as your palm and as thick as your palm. And that will get you to your 30 grams. And that needs to happen at every single meal. And this so you can protect your muscle mass. And the exercise thing, everybody who's overweight should, that's kind of what everybody should be doing anyway. So hopefully you can implement that into your life to protect your muscle mass. So do I think these medicines are worth it? No, because I think that the effects that people are suffering from are not good. It's not teaching them anything. Once they stop it, they haven't changed their eating patterns. They didn't know what they were supposed to eat to lose weight. So they go back to what they were doing previously and they gain the weight back and then some, like you mentioned. So it's not really teaching the person anything. It's just a little Band-Aid fix.
I see. So it's almost like, let's say I had gas issues and I go, the over-the-counter drugs and just to deal with that. Like it's again, another Band-Aid temporary fix. So interesting.
Yeah.
So, one more question for you, like on the, medication side, you've obviously encountered a lot of medications over your life there, being a pharmacist, and, anything that new that comes out, like do we have to kind of like just pause for a moment, say, hey, this is a new thing. We don't have the data points to really assess, whether it's good or bad. Yeah, there studies, FDA approved and all that sort of thing out there. But I don't know if you have like kind of like a general rule, like you see a new drug out there to address a certain infection or different things, or in this case, weight loss. Like, should we wait 5 years before and just let the kind of, let things settle a bit before anyone even thinks about trying something new and improved, I guess? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a great question. This is my personal preference. I'm never an early adopter. I never buy the latest and greatest first new thing because I always know that the second generation is going to always be a little bit better. So I'd rather wait. But yeah, I would say that definitely waiting is important because when they do these clinical trials, it's very interesting. They only study them, and I'm just going to use some rough numbers. It could be 50,000 people or, maybe if that. And then they bring it out to the population. Now you're hitting millions. It's such a different drastic study population and they don't have all the data. Another thing is a lot of the times when these drugs get submitted for approval to the FDA, all they're submitting to the FDA is their results and their analysis and their discussion. And the FDA says, oh, okay, great. This is wonderful. You can pass this drug. They actually don't send the FDA the raw data to look at the information to make sure that the statistics are actually correct. They're actually just taking the word of the pharmaceutical industry. So that becomes a little bit of bias, right? You're letting these people do their own analysis and come up with their own results and having their own scientists give you the information that now you're going to approve without double checking it. So there's a lot of behind the scenes things that we need to be cautious about when it comes to new drug approvals. And then another thing to think about is a lot of these drug approvals and these new drugs that come out, we call them Me Too drugs. It's why if you think about cholesterol medicines, there's over like 6 or 7 different cholesterol medicines. They're another Me Too drug. And they'll usually change something in the molecule so that it maybe metabolizes different or lasts longer in the body, but it doesn't really do much different mechanisms. It's not like a novel new treatment. So we have to be careful of that too. Is this another Me Too drug or is it actually a novel new treatment with a new mechanism and actually can validate some new treatment protocols? So we'd have to be cautious about that. But I would say wait, number one. Let the data roll out with other people trying to use it, see how people respond, do your research, and then also, questioning, is this a Me Too drug? Is this something that already exists out there and they're just baking it into another brand name to make it expensive, to make money? Because we have to remember that pharmaceutical companies are for-profit companies. They have stocks, they have shareholders, they have deadlines to meet, and we have to really take that into consideration when they're releasing these drugs.
I think it's a really good point, and I think just to supplement that is that the FDA. I mean, some of the funding that they get is from the pharmaceutical industry. So
Yeah.
perhaps there's some common interests there, and which makes it fall on to us everyday people. We have to really do our own research and seek out the information for ourselves, and do that even more so today.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great point there. Yeah, I think it's over like 50 or 60% of the FDA and even the WHO, the WHO is funded from pharmaceutical companies and that's a bias right there. That's not something we need to be cautious of that.
So I guess, when we take a step back here, heard a lot of interesting things here today. It's like if something's too good to be true, maybe just take a step back, like you say, and just
Yeah.
pause and, kind of see the landscape for it. And when it comes down to weight loss, maybe it's the old-fashioned way, diet, exercise, checking, how you're eating, what you're eating, the amount you're eating, and then maybe seeing your local nutritionist is probably not a bad way to start that journey to better weight loss, would you say?
Yeah, I would say that's a perfect way to start. Get rid of the processed foods, get rid of the things made from flour and white stuff, and just go back to eating whole foods. I always recommend people start with the paleo diet. It's a really great place that gets rid of it, just goes back to eating outside around the outside of the grocery store. And that'll do you so well if you follow it for a couple weeks.
So we covered a lot of great stuff, Loredana, and as we kind of wind up this podcast, I always ask my guests a two-parter question to close. So here goes. What are you most grateful for, and what are you most looking forward to in the future?
It's a really good question. I would say I am most grateful for my family and my friends. Definitely social support is a huge part of my life. I grew up in a little Italian family with my aunt across the street, my granddad on the corner. And I have a wonderful group of friends that I could call in a second and they would be at my doorstep if I needed them with any problems. And so one of the things that we look at health, we always think that health is also just like nutrition and exercise, but we also have to think about health as emotional health as well. So having a support system, having family and friends, having laughter. And so I'm blessed to have a lovely community of people around me. And so that would be what I'm most grateful for, because I wouldn't be here today without them. So that's my number one. And then what am I most look forward to? I guess my own journey in starting my own family. So I'm currently pregnant actually right now. And so we're just going to grow our little family and start raising some more awesome humans that can provide good to this universe and also be a support system for others. So that's what I'm most looking forward to.
That's awesome. Hey, and all the best to your little one on the way. And yeah, I'm curious to hear, your stories moving forward. So yeah, that's really great, Loredana. So if people want to know more about you, where can they find you?
Yeah, great. So my website is lifemodsolutions.com, and all of my social media handles, whether it's Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, is at lifemodsolutions. And my YouTube page, I would definitely go check out right away because there is some free gut health information. I post a bunch of times a week. And so you can start fixing your gut health right away. Read all of my copy and all of my posts because there's more tips outside of the video. I also offer an online course that people can take that's called Bye Bye Bloat and IBS. And so you can, from the comfort of your own home, using your own cell phone in under 5 to 10 minutes a day, you will learn what you need to do to start fixing your gut health and get access to the supplements that I use with my patients and get a timeline for how long it's going to take to heal. So very easy to follow.
Thanks, Loredana. So we'll be sure to add those details to our show notes. So that's a wrap for episode 29. If you like this podcast, please give it a thumbs up or hit the subscribe button below. If you didn't like this podcast, give it a thumbs down, but please do tell us why with a comment below. If you have any other comments, feedback, or suggestions, you know what to do. Thanks for joining us, and namaste, everyone.